When one of my friends from school named Emily was young, let's just say she was around 6 or 7 years old at the time. Now, every time when she was a young kid, she always gets excited for Christmas, Christmas Day, when she gets to open all the presents. Well, however, though, this took place sometime in the mid 2000s, probably 2006 or 2007. Emily couldn't sleep, as she was excited for Christmas, meaning that she wanted to stay up as long as she can, just so she could see Santa Claus and the presents that he would put under the tree. This happened years ago, and Emily barely remembers this, but I remember what she told me. I do apologize that if it's not in too much detail or if it doesn't make sense. She only remembers this vividly, and she barely remembers most of it, but I can make up from what she told me. When she was around 6 or 7 years old, she always wanted to be up late so she can see Santa Claus for herself. Although, as most parents would make sure their kids are asleep before Santa can arrive. However, Emily was up that night, and it might have been maybe around 10 or 11 at night when Emily woke up to hear something walking in the snow. She looked out of her bedroom window and saw that there was a figure standing in the middle of the snow in front of their driveway. In her 6-year-old mind or 7-year-old mind, she thought it was Santa, so she went over to her parents' bedroom and said that Santa Claus was there. Of course, her dad went over to look, but of course, he said no one was there. Emily was kind of disappointed, so she went back to bed. A few minutes later, she heard a knock coming from the bedroom door. She opened it to see that it was her mom. Her mom had told Emily to stay in her room and no matter what she does, do not come out. Of course, Emily did that and she just tried to go back to sleep. But she heard her father yelling, so obviously something was wrong. But of course, it wasn't until at least just recently when the conversation was brought up with her mom and her dad. Now, this is the part where Emily finally remembered what exactly happened, and she told me. She said when she was around 6 or 7 years old and she went to her parents' bedroom to think that it was Santa Claus, it was actually somebody with a knife attempting to break into the house. When the police arrived, whatever it was gone, and I think after Christmas, her dad went to go get some security cameras. To this day, Emily still is not sure if this guy was actually Santa or not, but now that she's much older, she doesn't really know what to think. To give a bit of background information, this happened to me some time ago. I think it might have been maybe the Christmas of 2016. Now, in Christmas of 2016, it was Christmas Eve, and it was already dark out when my parents, well, my dad and my brother and I left the mall. When we got home, we were just busy doing our usual thing when my dad was helping my mom wrapping presents. Now, I was in my living room just updating stuff on my computer and even doing the Santa tracker updates that I get all the time on knowing where he is. It's kind of a tradition that we do, so that's honestly something that we always did. I looked over to see my Christmas tree all decorated and ready for Christmas. I knew Christmas was the next day, so I could not wait to open the presents that my parents had got. My brother was just busy playing on his Xbox, while meanwhile I was on my computer. I looked over and see that I had to get some presents to put in the under the tree. My brother did it soon, and it was around nighttime when my brother went to bed. My parents were still in the middle of wrapping, so my brother and I had to head to bed early. We usually head to bed around 9 when we were younger, a lot younger, But since we were much older, we could stay up till around between 10 and 10:30. But when we were in bed, we could play quietly on our phones and etc. My brother didn't have a phone at the time. He had an iPad, and I had a phone at the time as well. Now, I was getting some of my Christmas presents for my brother and my parents so I could put them under the tree. As I was doing that, I heard the sound of footsteps as if someone was walking on my living room floor. This really confused me as my parents were upstairs. I could hear them talking through the vents as they were talking about, parent stuff, adult stuff, we'll just say, some grown up talk. Nothing too explicit or anything, but just your normal, grown up conversations and etc. I didn't think much of that as I thought my brother went to bed, so I went upstairs to see if he was in bed. Sure enough, my brother was in bed, so I headed back downstairs to put the presents under the tree. As I was doing that, however, I then heard footsteps again. And I know for a fact it wasn't from upstairs. So this obviously confuses me as who or what was in the house. All I know is that my cats were in the basement usually, so I didn't think much of it. But then all of a sudden I heard someone running down the stairs. Now this started to get creepy, so I went to the basement. As soon as I got down to the basement and turned on the lights, I make sure the cats were there, and most of the cats were on the couch, and some of them were on the speaker, or the fuzzy ones, and etc. Now, I didn't see anybody or anything, but seeing that I turned off the lights, I couldn't see any glowing lights or anything like that, so I knew for a fact that when I turned them off, I didn't hear anything. Just as I was going to the laundry room to check, I saw nobody was there, so that was obviously to my surprise that nobody was there. Just as I was about to go back up the stairs, I heard a cackle that came from the basement. I nearly almost shat myself as I ran up the stairs and closed the basement door. Of course, my dad ended up asking if I was okay, because he saw that I wasn't in my bedroom yet. I told him about something I heard in the basement. So my dad went over to see it, but he looked around. He said no one was down there and thought that maybe my mind was playing tricks. I just said to my dad, well, I must have been hearing things. But still to this day, I don't know what that noise really was. But I can definitely say it was completely paranormal. For some context, this happened sometime in Christmas of 2013. Now, to cut to the chase, I was maybe 15 years old, and as of now, I still remember this to this day. My brother was 12, and it was Christmas Day, so we were all getting ready to open our presents. As Christmas Day was going round well, and my granddad came over to spend Christmas with us, I all of a sudden looked to see that there was a strange present that had no name on it whatsoever. I ended up looking at it, and my dad ended up having a look at it too, and he said he didn't remember getting this present for me or my mom. My granddad was confused as well, so we ended up opening it. Once we opened it, we found something really, really messed up. We found what seems to be some drugs and even whatever for stuff else we find that was illegal. My dad called the cops, and as soon as the cops confiscated whatever we had shown them, I still don't know who gave us that gift to this day. But this was honestly the most disturbing present any of us have ever got. So this happened to one of my good friends, which we'll call her Sadie for the sake of the story. Sadie is my mom's age now, but this happened to her sometime in Christmas of 2004. Now, to cut to the chase, Sadie's two kids Marshall and Matthew were about maybe 8 and 9 at the time of this story. Now, Sadie was one of my mom's good friends, and of course, this honestly couldn't really bring the best piece as the story then later turns for a Jurassic turn. Sadie's two sons were already asleep, and her husband was already in bed, so Sadie was putting the last bit of presents under the Christmas tree. They couldn't really get too big of a tree since their apartment was too small. Well, not really too small, but it was not big enough for a big tree. They got a decent sized tree. Maybe not the best tree, but at least they got a decent sized tree. Not too little of a tree, not too big of a tree, around medium size. As Sadie put the last present down, she looked over at the blinds to see that there was a shadowy figure staring directly at her. At first she was confused and thought that maybe it was her neighbor pulling a prank on her. Whatever it was then was revealed himself when he exposed his hood and face. Its face looked like it was a man, maybe in his 40s, and he looked like he had a crowbar. Now, he didn't notice her, but Sadie was honestly in shock as to why he was here. Now, it was Christmas, and she honestly was horrified. Since it didn't notice her, it turned around and walked the other way. Sadie made sure all the doors and windows were locked and then headed upstairs, told her husband to call the cops, and made sure all of her children's bedroom doors were locked. Of course, they were, so it was honestly a safety precaution, as Sadie's house had been broken into maybe years ago, 4 or 5 years ago to be exact. As Sadie was in her house, in her bedroom, she honestly heard yelling and screaming coming from downstairs. It sounded like two men were fighting, and she looked down to see that the man that she saw through the window actually somehow got in through a broken window. She found out that he smashed the window with the crowbar, and her dad had knocked him out by hitting him with the back of the head with his own crowbar. The cops are called and took the guy away once he woke up from being conscious. And seeing that it was Christmas time, the cops ended up taking him to arrest him. It turns out that this man had been wanted for breaking into people's houses and assaulting people. What the most disturbing news is that this man had also killed a family of two kids that was maybe down the street, not far from where Sadie was. He was thankfully thrown in prison for a long time. This was one Christmas that Sadie will never forget. She is glad that she and her kids and her husband are still alive today, because I don't even know if she would still be alive if she didn't even go to her husband that night.